To this now, Treasury has proposed an additional 5 billion rand to the Department of Defence to assist in the SADC mission in the DRC. This comes as SADC has taken a decision to terminate the mandate of SAMIDRC troops that include the SANDF. The issue of shrinking budgets has troubled the SANDF for a long time now. So let's speak about these issues and more. Guy Martin is a defenceWeb journalist and joins us live now. Guy, good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. So before we even get to the budget issue, let's just start with your reaction to SADC terminating the mandate of SAMIDRC and the withdrawal now that we know that is going to be a phased-in approach.
Good evening and thanks for having me. Now, I think the withdrawal of South African troops and the termination of the SAMIDRC mandates is long overdue. Our soldiers have been stuck in Sake and Goma basically under M23 rebel control since the end of January. The situation is quite dire. The M23 rebels have been restricting food and water. Conditions are not great in the SAMIDRC camp. So I think it's long overdue that we have a resolution and an end in sight. And I think this is one of the better outcomes for the SANDF, because if we had tried to withdraw in a bit of a hurry, we might have been forced to leave our equipment behind. But at least this way, with an orderly phased withdrawal, it looks like we should be able to bring our soldiers and our equipment in Goma home.
How orderly is it likely to be, given the fact that some territories have been shut down and we're hearing of some concerns even about the flow of humanitarian assistance?
So the humanitarian situation is not great at all, and the M23 are restricting the flow of humanitarian aid into the region. So it's not going to be easy, and at this point we don't have much clarity on exactly how the withdrawal is going to happen and even the timelines of the withdrawal. And we do know that the runway at Goma Airport has been slightly damaged, but the main issue with flying troops out and equipment out from Goma is not just the damage to the runway, it's also the fact that the M23 are deliberately blocking the runway. I believe there are a few small craters that could be relatively easily fixed. So ideally, we would be able to fly our troops and equipment out of Goma. Previously, Rwanda has hinted that South African and SADC troops could leave, but on Rwanda's terms and through Rwanda, which would be a bit of an embarrassment and a humiliation. So I think it all depends now on what the diplomatic negotiations are going to look like. We've seen that the DRC government is finally willing to talk to the M23 rebels and to engage with Rwanda. Up until now, they've been very reluctant to do so. I think the fact that the SAMIDRC mandate has ended has sort of pushed the DRC government in the right direction, and now they're open to negotiations, and we might be able to get this all wrapped up relatively quickly now.
Do you think that the negotiations can yield the desired outcome? And I ask this because, we've seen lots of talks over time, various agreements that have been put in place, and seemingly the implementation seems to be the problem. And even who needs to be at the table is also another issue of contention, as you would have heard. President Tshisekedi, for example, saying that he doesn't want to legitimize the M23. But then now you do have SADC that says all parties, whether state parties, whether non-military, military, must be at the table. So can we see, an agreement that all these parties can stick to?
Well, I think what's different now is that the DRC doesn't have many other cards to play. So they are going to have to come to the negotiating table and reach an agreement. I mean, up until now, DRC has been trying to use the United Nations. They've tried to use the East African Community Force. They've tried to use the SADC to bring about a victory on the battlefield. And all of that has come to naught. So the only option now is to negotiate. So I think what we're seeing is the DRC government is taking this quite seriously. And I think there's a better chance now of reaching a diplomatic solution than there has been in quite some time.
And Guy, linked to this, right, is of course the issue of the budgets. We saw that the finance minister, and I'm taking from his remarks here, saying that over the medium term, 5 billion rand has been allocated to the Department of Defence to support South Africa's participation in the SADC mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and to supplement existing peacekeeping activities. Of course, lots has been said about this, and I wonder, what do you make of this proposal?
So that 5 billion was supposed to be allocated over the next 3 years. The first year, I think it's about 1.8 billion rand. But now all that's up in the air at the moment, because with the SAMIDRC mandate being terminated, our troops coming back, it's unlikely that that funding will be spent. So I think that what's going to happen is, for the last 2 years of that allocation, that won't be allocated at all. And the first year, that what money hasn't been spent will just be returned to National Treasury. So I don't think we'll ever see close to 5 billion rand being spent on the SADC commitment. But we do also have about 1,000 plus soldiers in the DRC serving with the United Nations mission. And that's funded under a different process, and the UN does reimburse us for that deployment. So I think of the 5 billion rand, I think most of that will be unspent and just simply returned to Treasury.
And given the fact that over time we've seen even the Defence Review has been clear on this, that the mandate versus the resources is an issue that really needs urgent attention, that if you do have an issue with an allocation of resources and you do not have as much money as you would like, then possibly relook at the mandates that you are agreeing to. And then now you have a number of other people who are saying as well that potentially look at cutting back on the spending around VIP protection and give a bit more towards the SANDF, given some of the budgetary constraints that they have at the moment. I wonder, what is your take on this debate that's currently ongoing?
So I think it's quite simple. We need to fund the Defence Force according to the tasks that are given. And if we look at what's happened in the DRC, it's absolutely clear that the funding is not sufficient for the SANDF to carry out its mandate. In the DRC, it didn't have enough air power, it didn't have proper logistic support. Our deployment was completely under strength to fulfill the mission. And as we've seen, that mission was essentially a failure. In order to adequately deploy to international peacekeeping and peace enforcement missions, we would probably have to double the defence budget. And I don't think that's going to happen. There's been a lot of talk about raising the defence budget to 1.5% of GDP. The Wednesday budget showed that the increase was below inflation. Defence spending is 0.8% of GDP. So the government is clearly not serious about funding the SANDF adequately. So the only option we have at this point is to scale back the mandate, to stop international deployments, to focus on South African regional, local defence, border security, because that's pretty much all that we can afford at the moment. And on the matter of the VIP budget, the police for the last financial year, the VIP protection budget was about 2 billion rand, and that's scheduled to double over the next 3 years to nearly 5 billion rand. Now, that is a tremendous amount of money that I think could be much better spent on the Defence Force, especially considering how many demands the Defence Force has placed on it. Not just peacekeeping, but border security. We're seeing a lot more natural disasters. We've got flooding in KZN. We've got a lot of felt fires happening. So those are all tasks all problems that the SANDF needs to respond to. But without the budget, they're having a great difficulty in, for example, providing helicopters for mountain rescue, for example. So I think if we slim down the VIP protection budget, we could make much better use of that with the Defence Force.
Guy, appreciate your time this evening. Thank you so much for your insights. That's Guy Martin there, a defenceWeb journalist who was joining us to chat about, of course, withdrawal of the troops in the Eastern DRC. That's the SAMIDRC mandate that has been terminated, and we know it's a phased-in approach. But of course, you juxtapose this, right, with the budgets for the SANDF that we've been talking about over time now, to say that they continue to shrink and the impact that is having on the work of the Defence Force.